These pictures are Wentworth Woodhouse, but we're talking about a landscape master plan this evening. And there's usually common themes between all the landscape master plans we do, and some of those are just listed on this slide. But to sum it all up, it's about solving problems and giving a landscape a kind of new or a renewed spatial identity and a sort of a new lease of life, but always with these points in mind. If we don't do a plan that sort of ticks all of these boxes, then we haven't done our job properly. So yeah, we need to respect the significance, sort out access issues. Obviously there's access issues here. Disperse visitors to enable lots of different kinds of groups of people to use the space at once. And look at sort of holistic solutions that work for income generation, heritage, and incorporating sort of sensitive new design where it's necessary to make the landscape work, but always really with an eye on the heritage and making sure any new things fit with the history of the site. Work out which way is the best to do this. So you might think, well, why do we actually need a landscape master plan apart from sort of sort out car parking and those kind of boring logistic things? You know, Scott does a brilliant job here with the gardens. You know, the horticulture is fantastic. So why do you actually need a plan? You know, you've got a great head gardener. Surely that's enough. But there's a number of complex issues at Wentworth, which I'm sure many of you are aware. But there's fragmented ownership. Obviously, the trust only owns the 83 hectares, which is the area immediately around the house in the slightly brighter green. So we've got the garden centre and the farm, and then the wider estate. So it's important to work with all the neighbours and get on, you know, work out a plan that sort of hopefully works for everyone, and try and kind of produce a plan that sort of solves problems for everyone. We need to establish that consensus and agreement with all those partners. With the garden, it's never really had a plan before. So what we sort of don't want to do is someone to come along and put in a new element which might then compromise other ideas from happening at a later date. So it's great to have a plan that everyone can sign up to and agree, you know, what's going where and when it's going to happen. What are the priorities to you know, do the best for the garden as a whole and the estate. There's many access issues. It's not just about parking, it's about getting around the gardens. You know, people with all kinds of mobility levels need to be able to enjoy as much of the garden as possible. And it's a key part of the plan to ensure that happens. Just to say as well, you'll know about the funding that's received from the National Lottery Fund for the stable block up here and the Camellia House. So funding was already received for that, but there was no overall plan for the garden. So it's really important to put those projects in context and make sure that whatever was happening with them wouldn't kind of somehow compromise any other aspect of the garden. So the people here are probably really familiar with Wentworth Woodhouse, so I won't dwell on these slides too long. But for those who don't know the estate so well, this is just to sort of remind people of the scale of the landscape. I think that the wider estate is something like 6,000 hectares, which is, you know, what's that? How big's that? It's kind of big. You can see it there. But I think that's something like 20 times the size of Hyde Park and Kensington Gardens put together. So that's, you know, that covers if you think of that on the sort of map of London, that's a big area. And the scale of the monuments is testament to the scale of the whole estate. So we've got the Needles Eye monument here, and the Rockingham monument. And you'll note the columns. We'll come back to those columns later, but they were once within the gardens. So this is Repton. Repton was here in 1790. Repton's bridge which of course I'm sure you all know isn't actually a bridge, it's a dam holding up the lakes, which he remodeled. But you wouldn't know that from the distance. He's sort of engineered it to make it look like a bridge over the river. And the next is you can just see the intricacy of the water engineering put in to create those illusions and that landscape theatre, if you like. And the scale of the works that were done for the Fitzwilliams. And the windmill and the Huber stand all in the wider estate. So this is one of the less fortunate interventions, and another good reason why you need a plan and you need to understand the significance of a historic landscape. So this very unfortunate roundabout and pylon at one of the lodge entrances, the Rainsborough Lodge there, which is a really, really unfortunate juxtaposition of roundabout highway signage and heritage asset. So more interventions, more development. The 70s college buildings, accommodation block and the tennis courts. So what was originally designed, and it's a shame John Phibbs isn't with us here this evening because he would talk about point blank, or the views, the design views to the various buildings when you get the sort of maximum effect, that right angle view of this monumental stable block, which you might think was the main house if you were a first time visitor here. So yeah, unfortunate sighting of a large asphalt tennis court. So this is just kind of shows how important it is to understand the significance of your landscape before you go kind of plonking things into it, thinking, oh, there's a nice space. Oh, look, we can put some tennis courts in there. Oh, look, let's just put this, whatever it is, in this space. So the existing gardens coming in to the scale of the project. So the brief that we have to work with is with the 83 hectares of the gardens surrounding the house. So it's this general area. Again, probably all of you people are very familiar with it, but just to point out some of the key, I'm not sure, does this? Yeah. The stable block I mentioned earlier, and the orangery, the two main buildings that are subject to the large funding bids, which will be restored in the near future, in the next couple of years, probably, I would imagine. So the main lawn nearest to Wentworth Woodhouse itself. The landform rises up here. We'll talk more about that in a minute. And the woodland garden to the north and the rhododendron woodland garden to the south. Little botanic garden up here, very historic, and the main flower garden here, and the Ionic temple over here. I think even for people who are kind of really familiar with the gardens, it's quite handy to see it on a plan, because there is quite a lot of plan-based slides in this talk. So yeah. So some of the challenges. Some of the, I guess, views is one of the main things that's been lost over time. The college buildings we've already talked about, and the main college building located here is taking up a key part of the site. We've got lost views within the gardens. The garden centre has kind of truncated this main axis along. You can still look through the gates, but you come to a load of sheds and close board fencing in the garden centre, which is unfortunate. It'd be great if that could be extended into something a bit more impressive. Derelict buildings, and then this large area of the former colliery workings. And we'll talk more about that as well later. More parking down here, and then the lost access to Temple Hill and what was formerly the quarry garden, which is a really interesting part of the site. And it'd be great to open up access to that later as well, although it's obviously not in the Trust's ownership. So you can see the extent of the other operations within the wider estate, the farm and the garden centre. And the other sort of access and approach to the estate. So we'll move on to the next slide. So we're going to have a quick kind of walk around the gardens, quick canter round, just to look at some of the issues. When we start doing a master plan, it's really important that we visit the site quite a lot to get familiar with the lie of the land and to have a look at what works and what doesn't from a landscape perspective. As I say, I mean, the gardens are obviously great, and you might think, well, there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. Why would you want to change anything? And people are very protective about landscape, so it's important to respect the fact that people get attached to what they know, but try and kind of just adjust things to make them work better. We know that the Trust needs to attract loads more people to the site to maximise its income generation, and one of our thoughts really was that the site largely, as Repton sort of left it in some ways with its labyrinthine paths, is not great at dispersing people. What's happened over the years is shrubberies such as this one have kind of grown closer to the path, and we're left with a kind of a very narrow walkway. And so everyone's really kind of channeled around narrow paths, and there's not really any sort of breathing space, no kind of spaces to sort of sit or take a picnic off the track. So everyone's sort of following a route. The stable block, the riding school, is subject to the funding, and there will be a new access coming into the gardens at around this sort of area, and that'll be the opportunity for a new glade or garden to open out onto it. The other thing with the narrow paths, obviously, with the increasing visitor numbers, is they get really boggy over the winter months, and Scott's been recently renewing lots of the paths, so they're in much better condition than the last time I was here, which is great to see that some of the elements of the master plan are already underway. So the next slide is the ice house, which is an interesting little building, and again Scott's just been doing some recent clearance of that, so it's much easier to actually see than the last time we were here. And we were talking actually just before the lecture about what it could have originally looked like, and I was saying I imagined it would be kind of like a green hill with the yew trees that were on it, possibly shorter originally, so it was actually a green mound. And Scott was saying that he'd seen examples at Croom Court where it could have been thatched, so that's that's good. Yeah. So yeah, that's a great. Yeah, no, that's useful.
2 guineas to read that.
2 guineas, bargain.
It'd be interesting to kind of liaise perhaps with Croom Court and follow their journey and not make the mistakes they've made. And just
definitely, yeah. So yeah, that's good.
A thatching course for you.
I'll fit that in, yeah. With my many other talents.
Yeah, we'll put it on the list. Well, that's why, the master plans are never set in stone. It's always work in progress, and things can get refined as they go along and reprioritised when new evidence comes to light. In my defence, I'll just say that while we were doing this project, we were in lockdown. We couldn't get to any of the archives. And the times we did come up here was sort of just before everything locked down again, and we couldn't stay anywhere, so it was a sort of flying visit. So yeah, I'm sure lots of you here have many more facts than I do about the history of the gardens. Right, where are we? The drying yard is a really interesting area, and obviously very underused at the moment. Lots of self-sown sycamores, but a fantastic space, both potentially for school groups and that kind of messy activity, loud, boisterous stuff that maybe not the kind of day-to-day garden visitor would appreciate if they had a bunch of, 50 school kids or whatever doing something really noisy and boisterous. But this is a great space for them to do things in, and also cut flower garden, which can support the work in the house. Just talking to Scott again, the idea is that you could have a sort of cut your own flower garden, so people can pay and cut their own flowers rather than go to a sort of traditional florist type thing, which is a really nice idea. So yeah, really, really interesting space. Next, yes. Within the pleasure ground itself, the kind of main axis, two major changes. First in the 18th century, when the main approach to the house would have been from this side. So you would have entered. Oh, sorry, I've gone the wrong way. Pressed the wrong button. So originally you would have approached the house from this direction. Coming in, if I can do it on the plan there, from the west front. And so what Repton did was actually sort of turn the landscape, or turn the house around and make it so the approach was to the east front. And he designed various landscape elements in order to achieve that, and we'll look at that in a bit. But yeah, so the two major changes to the pleasure ground, that approach, change in the approach, and then the second one being the colliery workings, which we'll come to again. So, another characteristic in the pleasure grounds is the botanic garden, which has changed a lot during the centuries, and we'll look at that on some plans in a bit. But yeah, generations of enthusiastic gardeners. So this botanic garden would have had some really sort of rich flora within it, and there's evidence we've just had a look at of paths within that can be uncovered, and lots of restoration work. So the pool, thought to be sort of 1920s, 30s. The Lady Maud's addition, again, can still form a sort of central feature within that. But these amazing urns that are there can be much better located and have a really good setting around them, so people can again stop and have somewhere to sort of have their picnic, or stop for a cup of tea or whatever, or just stop for a break and just sit and be for a while rather than always walking around. Yeah, I think that's probably enough on that one. The Camellia House, I think there's already been a lecture on the Camellia House, so I'm sure everyone knows about that, but the approach from the north front and the very elaborate entrance, and then the south front, looking out onto the lovely south-facing lawn, soon to be restored. And lots of records of the horticultural correspondence between the Countess and Repton's old school friend, the botanist J. Smith, which I'm sure people here know all about. So this is an interesting one. This is some of the colliery spoil workings.
They really are ugly photos.
Yeah, this is the ugly photos. So yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, thank you.
This is one of the -2 days when it was chucking it down with rain. But one of the sort of less successful parts of the garden, which is really out of scale in sort of landscape form, is this little bowl, the photo on the left, and the problems with drainage. So I'm not sure if everyone knows, but half of the gardens was dug up for open cast coal mining in the 40s, and we'll say a bit more about that and see some photos of that later too. But this is what we're left with. We've got sort of serious issues with drainage, and it's really difficult to grow trees in that kind of condition, which is why there's lots of willows that have been planted there in an attempt to try it out, which is kind of, oh, it sort of works. And then the flower garden, which is fantastic borders in the summer, looking up to the Ionic temple. Really lovely part of the garden, but not in many gardens. There's a bit more intrigue about them, so you don't see everything at once. While the borders are brilliant, you kind of get everything in one go. No suspense, no mystery, and so yeah, we had some thoughts about that. So the analysis, I won't go through all of these. How are we doing for time? Yeah, not too bad. But you can see we've just picked out some of the main items we thought could be improved with the master plan, and some of the things that don't work so well. There's sort of encroachment on the main lawn with, I think, Lady Maud's sort of enthusiasm for planting lots and lots of different species. It was kind of plant. And it started to kind of encroach on this side of the lawn, whereas up this side where it rises up, the landform rises up, you kind of, when you're at the top, you sort of see the house, and there's not much variation going on, not much gradation, as Repton would say. The woodland garden, lots of narrow paths, but no kind of spaces. So it's that spatial variation that's been lost over time. The vista to the punch bowl up here, is very uneven, as you saw in that last slide with drainage issues. But it could be, a real sort of crisp vista. And the axis has got sort of land banking on the side of it. I should have looked at that at the earlier slide. But it's again being encroached by rhododendrons. So instead of seeing the vast scale of the house, it's being sort of, the view is being encroached by creeping rhododendrons coming into it. I think we'll leave that slide there because we've kind of talked about the rest of it earlier on. Just a few historic slides here, this is what John would have talked about were he here. So I'm going to skip through these fairly quickly, as I'm sure lots of people here know more about them than I do. Just to say the way me and John works, John is from Du Bois Landscape Survey Group, and I'm Sally Prothero Landscape Architecture. He does a lot of the landscape research and archive work and looks at the historic context, whereas I'm a landscape architect who does more spatial design and looks to sort of the forward look. And the way we work is we meet in the middle, debate the history, the significance of the site, and then what we think that the solutions and master plans should be, and then I take it through to detailed design. So that's kind of how we work. So that's my intro to saying I'm going to skip through these slides very quickly. So there's three sort of phases of garden mania. The first one being this very regular geometrical layouts, and John overlaid those onto this Ordnance Survey plan, which is the 1848 plan, I think, just to see those overlays of the different geometric layout, just to see where they land up on the later plan. So you can see, look at these obelisks. Those are the ones around the Rockingham Monument that we looked at earlier. The next slide is a painting, which that's not my spelling, I hasten to add. And it's not to be reproduced, so we might have to take this one out of the thing. This was sent to us by the estate, so we're grateful to them for showing it to us. And you can just see the scale of the landscape. This is the house here, and the Ionic temple along the bastion wall, with all the other various temples round and about. But there's lots of kind of questions, so we won't dwell on this one either. The next slide, Garden Mania 2, with all these huge monuments around the estate. They were placed with a great deal of geometry, with the views that sort of radiate out from each other, and this kind of puts them in context. You can see the geometry with which lots of them line up. And around that time, the theodolite was invented. And so it was a kind of a new toy for people with vast amounts of money to play with and line things up and say, oh, I think I'll put my new monument just over there on axis with whatever. So yeah, interesting to look at those, and you can just see the list, the timeline of those major monuments going up around the estate. So yeah, John did many of these similar diagrams to show the relationship of them all. So here we get to a really interesting plan, the 1778 plan. And just before Repton arrived on the scene, so it's great to have this plan that shows what it's like before his interventions. Now we've got, I think it's interesting anyway, this little section here, which shows the cutting away of the hill. Which Repton, when he started, said, no, you don't want to cut away the hill. That's the one by the tennis court car park, with the Doric temple on the top. So, which would have been the quarry garden. So yeah, it's just nice to see that little section. And the note on it says, the lawn was extended hither in 1778 by removing the hill. So the thought that you can just kind of send 100 people in and remove a hill so you get a better view of the lake is the sort of scale of the landscape we're talking about.
That's my job next week.
Yeah. That's on the priority list.
Yeah.
You
got JCB.
Volunteers.
Yeah, oh yeah, volunteers job, yeah, that's right. So, Repton arrives, his famous red books. You can see our obelisks again on the left-hand side. These are Repton's before and after. Some people who are listening, watching, may not be aware of Repton's red books, but he sort of produced these like sales catalogues as to what you can do with your garden. So the one on the left is the before, as it was, and he sort of said, there's a kind of a green wall here. We don't, a green wall divides the garden up too much. What we need is gradation, and so he produced this before sketch, and then the second, the after sketch. So this flap here was taken away to reveal what it should be like after he's done his magic. And so he's obviously removed the obelisks and started to break through that wall of green and lead the eye up to the landscape, so people know that there's more to be seen, more to be had further up. And John's assessment was this is a very intact Repton landscape. And he saw himself as solving two particular problems. First, to make the pleasure ground a relaxed and informal space. Before it was very rigid, hard lines, obelisks, etc. And the second was to, as I mentioned before, turn the house round in effect. So you approached it from the east front. His alterations to the drives and the approach, so you got maximum kind of view at certain locations along the approach drives. And so here's another one. You can just see the line of the flap here. So here's the people taking away the hill. And then he came along and said, no, you don't want to take away the hill. That's the hill can be improved. So his solution is to make a second pleasure ground up here. In effect, a kind of quarry garden around the temple up here, the Ionic temple. Actually, it's a Doric temple, isn't it? So he can show off some of the rocky scenery, but also from up there you can get a really good view of the lakes, which are otherwise kind of hidden really from the house. So just going back to the drives we talked about, this shows that the plantations put in by Repton, or put in by the time he's probably by him. And the blue lines are showing the drives, and then the yellow lines are showing what's known as the bursts. So when you come around the corner, just over the brow of the hill, you get the big view of the house. It's like the big wow factor. And the reds are the clumps of the trees, which prevent that view, prevent everything from being revealed at once. So it's theatre, it's landscape drama through planting, through landform, and through designing routes. So you get that big wow factor at particular points when you're approaching the house and think, wow, that's where we're going. And so the first view would be from the east front. So 1849, the first Ordnance Survey map. You can see things are starting to get a bit congested. There's sort of routes going everywhere. You can see they've planted a big avenue, so they've sort of obliterated the space and the kind of grandeur of the west front by planting an avenue of trees right up to it. So you wouldn't actually be able to see the big grandeur of the architecture with that there. By Lady Maud's time, you can see that her planting is starting to kind of creep up towards the house there. And I suppose not all that much has changed. And then the Coal Board, 1943, and the nationalisation of the coal mines, which was a sort of a deliberate act really to mine, open cast mine, and right up to the doors of several of the wealthy landowners who owned all the coal mines up to that point. And we'll see a couple of photos of what happened to the gardens at that time. So it's a pretty dramatic intervention into an estate. So just to orientate people who aren't familiar with these pictures, you can see there the stable block, and here the west front of the house, and all of this, that's the little Ionic temple, and all of this is the open cast workings. So you can see when they backfilled all that and put it back, that's where we get our drainage problems. That's where the settlement, the uneven settlement in the grass, which is why all the levels are pretty up and down in that area. So yeah, a serious intervention, but I mean, it is part of the story of the landscape. And, I think it's really important to tell the story of the landscape rather than to try and pretend that never happened. A lot of people, worked in the coal mines. Their story is part of the history, and I think it's important to recognise that landscapes do change, and it's a part of the recognition. So the later Ordnance Survey shows that with that big hole So that was when it was kind of reinstated by the coal board, i.e. put down to grass, and then ever since then it's sort of settled, and that's before the flower garden that went in the
2008.
Yeah.
Yeah.
2000, yeah, as late as that. So we'll get to I'm going to rattle through these. Just to say, in developing the concept master plan, we've sort of looked at and analysed the different design periods and looked at what's come and gone throughout the different design periods. So these series of plans, overlays of the historic plans with today's CAD topographic survey. So we can see exactly what's come and gone over the different time periods. So this one is the 1930s OS plan. Again, all the different colours just show what remains from which period. So we'll skip through those fairly quickly. But it's really just to let people know the kind of process that we go through when drawing up a landscape master plan. And then most importantly, we get to the sort of significance plan. Things that are really important to the landscape and we absolutely, must preserve or restore and conserve or restore. And things which are actually sort of detrimental to how the landscape's working now. So the detrimental bits, obviously the colliery spoil workings are shown in the grey area. The items of red are the really high significance. A lot of those are buildings, but other ones are spaces. For instance, the lawn, the little botanic gardens dating back from the sort of 1700s. The duck pond, actually, which we haven't talked about. That's on all of the plans from the earliest of days. It's changed shape a bit, but yeah, it's always been there and part of that model farm, part of the historic estate, which is a really charming bit, Camellia House, etc. So yeah, it's just a graphic way of showing what's really important in the landscape. And then finally, developing the concept master plan, which is what the lecture was supposed to be about. So once we've done all of this kind of research, survey, analysis, we actually need to decide what we're going to do with it, which is kind of getting to the point. So very, very sketchy, just ideas, put ideas down onto a plan to begin with and see what people's reactions are. We had discussions with Scott, with Sarah, with the board, the trustees, and just threw some ideas out. So I think actually we'll move to the next slide, but yeah, just get our ideas down. I think that's the main thing, and then we need to just refine them and work through them all, and how we're going to make this landscape work for everyone and resolve those issues that we've talked about. So the key moves: restoring views. We haven't talked about the views out. Originally, there would have been some connection with the wider landscape, although it was very much, this whole area was the private garden for the Fitzwilliams, and eventually their kind of back garden rather than the grand approach to the house. Now, kind of conversely, this is the public bit, and the kind of wider estate is the private garden, which is slightly ironic. So this needs to cater for loads and loads of people. But we need to cater for lots of people and still keep its labyrinthine character. People really like the fact that you can walk around the kind of really kind of curvy paths and get kind of completely lost and sort of think, oh, I'm not sure if I'm on the right path, or have I been to this bit before? And obviously, the planting, etc., changes throughout the seasons and adds to that kind of mystery. So we want to keep that character, but create more space. So how do you do that? We want to use the landform. We need to modify the landform, we thought, to tell the story of the coal workings and the mining history of the area. How do we do that? We need to create a bit more spatial variation to create different spaces so people can have a small gathering, kids' party or something in one area, kind of not exactly rent out the space, but yeah, have kind of book an area of the garden, or just have an informal picnic when people are visiting. We need to cater for maintenance activities, and we had many discussions about where the maintenance area should be, and it certainly looks like it's going to be staying here for now. And then allowing for other activities, as we talked about, glass houses possibly in the drying yard. And yeah, sculptural landforms to maximise views back to the house and create more usable landscape, more usable spaces for massive events or smaller events on sort of sculpted flatter areas. We'll look at those in more detail. So we're just going to go around this in a little bit more detail around each of the areas. So we've looked at this boundary treatment, and what's happened over the years is lots of self-sown sycamores have sprung up. They've blocked all the views out to the wider landscape, and it would be possible to open up those views again. So when you're in the garden, you still feel part of the wider landscape and get that sense of the kind of grandeur of the scale of it all. The ice house we've talked about, and also in keeping with the sort of Reptonian character, is to carve out, if you like, some garden glades in the spaces to cater for more people to use it. So in conjunction with the restoration of the stable blocks, the access will be through the stables. And we'll move on to the next one. So yeah, people will come from the car park, and the garden visitors certainly will come in through the stables and into the gardens. So here we'd like to create a sort of more of a welcome. So when you come through the stable door, you'll come into a large area of lawn, and you can kind of relax. Right after having walked around sort of stable blocks, or having been sat in the car in traffic for God knows how long it's taken you to get here, you can kind of really feel like you've sort of arrived somewhere, and you'll be in a garden instantly. At the moment, there's lots of the rhododendrons are kind of really impressive, but they've sort of taken over kind of an area of sort of 30 feet, like with one plant, I think, in some cases. So yeah, we're talking about carving out sort of the garden glades, but each of these, they won't be exactly as they're shown on these plans. It'll depend on, you know, what tree is growing in the space and how each one is articulated. It'll be a sort of detailed design with Scott and his team. Just moving around, car park, botanic garden, restoration of that, and that's where, you know, further research will definitely be really valuable to see what people know about the kind of detail of the planting, etc. The main woodland paths, which have been re-gravelled just recently and looking very good. I think the alignment of some of these and the placement of one of these major urns at a junction of the paths will be a really good orientation point and a real focal point within the woodland garden here. We'll move on to the next one. Oh yeah, this is just a little sketch to illustrate what we were talking about with the glades and paths. So this is the existing situation with everyone's kind of on a narrow path, and what we'd like to do is just open them out. This is just a schematic diagram, and have a more graded edge to the borders in some of them, depending on their aspect. So you can get more of a, so it's sort of mimicking a woodland edge really, where you can improve biodiversity by getting a lot more light into the area, grow a much wider range of encourage pollinators, etc., and give people space to gather and do whatever they want to do. They can all have different themes as well. So some of them might be sort of shady ones with woodland, ferny themes, and other ones will be really sunny with different colour themes, different seasonal themes, etc. Just an example of a graded border. I'm just aware of time is pressing on, so we'll skip through these. This is at Ensley, but you can see the gradation of the planting on the border there. So back to key moves to the southwest. I suppose this is the area where there's most change proposed in the master plan. So yeah, the orangery restored with the entrance there. And we've sort of suggested a semi-enclosed bit of formal garden closest to the cafe outside seating space for the orangery. But then that can lead out into the orchard, which is more of a sort of like a romantic orchard with slightly older trees and the wildflowers, which is all developing already. So it's halfway there already. And maybe some more planting along the edge of that drive. So the flower garden is really successful. But the access to it is quite a steep bank. It's possible to make this completely accessible for wheelchairs, easier for buggies and easier for everyone. And if it's easier for everyone, it's got to be a good thing. But in order to do that, you need to just change the contours a bit. You need to actually physically change the landform to make the gradient shallower. In order to be able to do that, i.e. make a longer path, we need to just move that end of the flower garden a bit. So physically move the hedge in and change the gradient of this slope to make it accessible. The other thing that does is gives people space to actually move around, get around that corner. It's quite a treacherous little corner. It's a bit dodgy, certainly for maintenance and certainly for visitors getting around. It's quite steep. Here we've proposed a modification again to the landform to create a bridge into the flower garden. So you don't sort of see everything all at once. It's about creating intrigue and mystery and giving the gardens an air of discovery. So that the landform here is very high, and there's a high bit of landform here. By bringing those landforms closer together and adding a short bridge, then people can enter the flower garden underneath the bridge, and then they'll arrive in the flower garden and think, wow, that's an amazing flower garden, rather than sort of come across it in a slightly less dramatic way. Similarly, you can get to the Ionic Temple, which we'd propose to kind of clothe in some of the rockery stone, which is already in the garden from the previous mount, the 18th century mount. So the Ionic Temple sits on a rocky mount and can be approached via going over the bridge. Again, the views to the Ionic Temple we would propose to screen, so you don't see the Ionic Temple from the flower garden. You might see a little bit of it, and then you'll think, oh, there's something going on around there. I want to go and explore and have a look. So it's about making people want to go and explore bits of the garden, rather than sort of giving them the whole view in one go. We talked about our primrose path, improving the floral diversity along this path here, and then the straight path leading straight to the Ionic Temple. And you can see the sculptural landform in sort of conceptual form. Drainage and water. Yeah, we'll just move on to the next slides. We've got just a few precedent images. Orchard, kind of romantic precedent image, rocky mounts. You can imagine these are very similar to the rocks actually already in the gardens, I think, leading up to the temple, and this more formal border, which would, I imagine, being part of the border outside the cafe in that semi-enclosed space, which you can then spill out into the orchard. So this is the bridge at Mulgrave, very Reptonian. So this is a sort of bridge, half tunnel, really. This is kind of a historic design. It wouldn't necessarily have to be an old historic style of bridge. You could do it in a modern style, but whichever. The point of the master plan is to kind of establish a principle and to get that on the plan. Southeast. There was all in the 1788 plan. There's the flower garden is shown up here. That's obviously all been kind of destroyed. This bit's been destroyed by the colliery workings. But it would be great to put a flower garden back up there. Again, it's another destination for visitors to go to. And it could be sort of half shade garden with the backdrop of the beech trees there, and half of it's in the sun. So again, that's another really nice kind of use of the existing site and the vegetation that's there. We've suggested a wetland up here. It's naturally very boggy, although it's high up. So what would in effect happen is this axis to the punch bowl, which is here, becomes kind of like a causeway. So you could walk along a regraded level axis with the wetland on either side. Great for biodiversity, great for kids to do pond dipping, all that kind of stuff, attract dragonflies. And it just gives another added interest or element to the garden, and working with some of what you've got as a problem now with all that boggy ground, turn it into an asset and create some more interest and biodiversity along the way. Right. And again, some precedent images of wetlands in other areas, just establishing, and some of the kind of woodland flora possible in the flower garden. Again, example of kind of glades where trees have been removed, gradation of flora leading up to that kind of woodland edge. And then you can see, this is just an example of again, using the rocks, the rocky mount, and then actually once you've got to the mount, you see the next bit of the garden and the next thing that you really want to go and have a look at. So it's just an example of creating that intrigue. Just the process we've been through. I'm very conscious of time now, it's going on a bit. Just working out contours. How do we create these plateaus? Which is what we were suggesting for the colliery workings, without kind of disturbing the trees. So we gone through a fair few iterations, just working out how it could be done, what should the landform actually look like. There needs to be more design on this, but it's just to explain the process. You know, we do actually still draw with pencils, and before it all goes onto the computer, and it's just part of testing things out to see what we can do. And I think the interesting thing with the landform is we can sort of solve other problems. The whole drainage of that area we can sort of sort out by incorporating swales into the various slopes and the flat aspects of the plateaus. The smaller plateaus can be used for smaller events, and the whole thing can open up as a big amphitheatre if there was a sort of big concert using the house as a backdrop. So it's about, again, using the variety of spaces in a way to benefit the trust and the house and the park. So design development, a few iterations, working out, you can see here, so these would be the flat areas. That obviously the house is here, the main lawn being the bottom plateau. The middle one, which the main axis goes through. So these are the steep bits with the contours closer together, but then getting an accessible path going up through across the contours. So it's accessible. We've got our gradient of 1 in 20, which is deemed accessible for wheelchair users. So that can be accessible all the way up the top. This is before we just thought about the bridge, this version. But yeah, and then the third plateau up the top here. So, and then this is just a sketch, an early sketch, working out contours again, how are we going to get that bridge to work. So it's an iterative process. We don't just kind of think, oh yeah, let's do the master plan and draw it immediately. It's kind of needs to be done a few times over to get things to work. So yeah, little 3D sketches to test the proposals, to say, okay, yeah, it sort of looks like it works on plan, but how does it actually sort of look in 3D or axonometric as this is. So yeah, the Camellia House, little bridge, rocks, reusing the rocks that are already in the garden, and you can see an attempt to sketch out the rocky mount with the Ionic temple sitting on the top, and the views kind of closed down by the shrubbery to create that interest and intrigue. So yeah, once we've sort of worked everything out, actually producing the sort of final master plan, it's done in AutoCAD over the topographic survey that we had done in the beginning. With all of the projects listed down here in sort of some detail, and this one just shows the kind of ideal approaches from the wider approach and removal of some of the temporary car parks, and ideally access to the Temple Hill over here. And other approaches from this little lodge, the Doric Lodge in the corner, and then rendered finally in colour. So this is sort of a final document. So the more detailed gardens master plan, just with more detail on the key there, each relating to the items on the plan. So I think this is probably publicly accessible if anyone wants to have a closer look, or I've got a copy down here if anyone wants to look at the little A3 reduced plan. But yeah, in due course, I'm sure the Trust will publish it if anyone's interested to see. So yeah, that's the kind of process we've gone through. And then just to finish up with the sketch, we did just to show it overall as a sort of 3D image. And just to finish up with the coloured version of the same thing. So yeah, that's the process of the drawing up the landscape master plan for Wentworth Woodhouse. I'm sorry that's probably gone on a little bit longer than we anticipated, but I hope that's given people some idea of how we kind of go about arriving at the plan and the steps we go through. Just to say, I suppose the next thing is the prioritisation of all of those items back on the list of projects.
And thank you to Sally and John for giving me the next 100 years of my career in trying to implement all this. Thank you very much, Sally.
Yeah, no problem, anytime.
So I think now if there's any questions or volunteers to help me in the garden, hands up please. Steve, in the back.
We had 2 questions online so far. First question, you made reference to a cockpit at one point. What was that and what era does it date from? And then the second question, this is relating to the Camellia House redevelopment. Are we looking to reinstate the rose gardens that used to sit outside?
I'll let you do the cockpit bit.
We use the mic.
All right, sorry.
Thank you.
Oh yeah.
Here. At the moment, the Camellia House, I think we are plagued with the legacy of the coal mining. So the area directly beyond the fountain is a bog. And from my understanding, to utilise and become a bit more environmentally friendly, that area of lawn is due to be ripped up, and we're putting in a ground source heat pump system which will power the Camellia House, and hopefully within that some drainage as well, so that will counter some of the wet that we have at the moment. Then I think that's when we get to look at what it is we're left with, because we don't have soil structure as you would imagine it now, so we may have to start regrading. So yeah, there's quite a few options for what that area becomes, and along with a lot of these projects, that's part of the excitement, that we get to sit and muse and mull them over. And the beauty of this project is it's that being rude, it's been glacial, it's been slow, it's been measured, it's been and how something like this should be done, especially a historic area like this, because you make one mistake and you can rarely undo those mistakes in a historic environment like this. So I think taking measured steps means that we can have the best result for the next centuries to come. Sally, I'll pass to you.
Okay, does this still work, or do I use that?
No, you're fine, sir.
So yeah, the cockpit.
I think the cockpit should be the bear pit. I don't think there's been a cockpit.
Yeah, that's
There's
in.
a bear pit there.
I think we should hand the mic over to you to answer this question. I think that's a very good idea. But could the bear pit not be used?
You have to say the area that's marked on here as cockpit, I think it's where the bear pit is, which is in the bit of the garden that the garden centre people maintain.
Yeah. It's outside the actual 83
Yes,
hectares, which is in the trust ownership. And what it is, I haven't got a photo here, but there's a sunken area.
That's
it's
right,
like a
yes.
stone.
Yeah.
And
Sunken stone archway round, and yes, yeah.
And it's about, I would say, from memory, although it was chucking it down with rain and -2 when I saw it, it's about 5 feet deep, maybe 3 feet.
Much more. Yeah, there are steps down
between 3 and 5 feet.
Yes.
And the reason I think we thought it was a cockpit, it isn't that deep. And
well, unless you're looking at something slightly different, then.
But it's so we thought that. Well, John thought.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm gonna.
Yeah, I may be wrong. So there is an area sort of on that side.
Yeah,
which
I think we're talking about the same place.
A bit difficult, yes.
Yeah, I was just seeing if I had it on some of the earlier OS.
Yeah.
But it's a circular or oval.
Yeah, I know where you mean now. Yes, in front of it, there's where they've got a little deer enclosure. Is that where you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm talking about a little area that's a little bit further to the west.
I think it's kind of here.
I've never. I mean, there may have been one, but I've never ever seen anything about a cockpit in that, in this vicinity.
I think so. Yeah, that's not a very satisfactory answer, but we'll. That would have been one for John if he had been here.
I think that kind of showcases what Wentworth has to offer. We've lost, there's the anecdotal story of the bonfire that burned for a day and a night. Whether or not that was just somebody getting rid of rubbish out of drawers, we don't know, or historic important things which would be of great importance to us now. And it's much like the Camellia story. It's that voyage of discovery, which is why we're all here. We want to be on board with that. We want to find out what's next, what's new. And with this is wonderful. This is almost like a modern day Repton representative coming to me. I mean, I've been here 18 years. I round it up to 20 now, just for dramatic intent. But it shows how someone like me that worked for the family when it was private can still find excitement in this landscape, which I thought my job's done here. It's planted, the paths are in, job done. And now we get this wonderful opportunity to pretty much buy new plants, that's a plus, and hire mini diggers and do digging. And so it just reinvigorates it, and it brings visitors and the whole story back to life. And again, with, I suppose, the world at large, we've got Sky TV coming to do a piece on the Camellia House, we've got a press day, we've got, we're going to be featured in the Telegraph over the weekend. Just the history just keeps, you know, pouring out story after story that people are still interested in. So, you know, it's a brave new world for Wentworth.
Yeah, and hopefully we'll really be putting the theatre back into the landscape.
Yeah. When you look at how involved they were with horticulture, again, the Camellia story, there's a wonderful rhododendron, Lady Alice Fitzwilliam, which we want to reintroduce, which is semi-tender, which will live in the Camellia House. The rose, Lady Mary Fitzwilliam, which we now have back in the border, the summer border, and the orchid Miltonia, again from the Milton family. So there's this legacy of horticulture which I'm incredibly proud to continue. So my passion for plants this is almost my legacy. For those of you that have visited the garden during February, that is my legacy to Wentworth, the Snowdrop Garden. So we take it outside of the traditional May to November visitor experience, and we bring to you a winter garden. Anybody else have any questions? Yes. I don't know what, I'll pass you. There.
This week is my first, or our first visit to the estate. Very impressive. Obviously you've got grand plans, particularly with the stable block, which is going to be the new entrance, is that right? Is that where visitors are going to come through the stable block?
Do I need a mic, Steve, or am I right?
What I was going to ask is, how do you propose that the visitors get from the stable block to the house? Because the impressive front of the house is the west front, but you're showing the access is through the gardens, which brings you in through the rear. So I wasn't sure how you divert people to, because you don't seem to have much land on the west front from the earlier plan. It sounds like you've got a very thin strip of land on the west front. And
on the east front.
Lawns belong to the east front.
Yeah.
All the big lawns belong to the wider estate.
The estates, yeah. Very good question. And one we've debated a long time. I think ideally we would really like to bring people in through the east front, so they get the full impact of that east front and get the Reptonian bursts, the big view of the house. So that's kind of ideal. But we need to consider where people are going to park, which is an unfortunate kind of reality that we have to face. And you're right in saying that, you know, we haven't got much land really. Going back to the significance of the site, we can't put car parks in a place which is going to block views to key landscape features. Currently the little car park's down here, but that's a real kind of blot on the landscape and kind of intrusive into the view of the Temple Mount, which is down here. So it's sort of, the only place to put the car park on the trust site is up here. But ideally, if all the neighbours and the trust can kind of work out a good deal for everyone, that works for everyone, there would be, if this car park becomes too small or whatever, it would be great for people to also park up here and be able to come down one of the sort of historic routes and get that sort of burst of the east front and come through the house and then into the garden. But some people only want to come to the garden. So, you know, there needs to be sort of flexibility about it. I suppose if someone's never been to the site before, you know, they'd probably want to come and see the house and do the garden. And other people who have been many times, they're more likely to want to come back and see the garden in different seasons, you know, to experience what Scott was just saying. And so for them, it may be better just to come straight through the stable blocks and into the gardens, not really, once you've sort of, I would say this because I'm a landscape architect, but once you've seen the house, you know what I mean, it doesn't change all that much. Of course, here they've got so many exhibitions on it, obviously it does, but so yeah, I think, yeah, your point is well made. And
I've got one related question to go with that, because you say it's compromised. You've got the garden centre and you've got the sunken gardens related to the garden centre, where you pay £2 to see those.
Yeah.
Which is all part of the long vista from
Absolutely.
the west
Yeah.
front. And then you've got the vistas to all the temples through the wider landscape
Yeah.
that Repton must have found very important.
Yeah.
Are you working together with these other outside bodies to maybe reinstall some of the grander landscape of Repton capability, whoever was involved?
Yeah.
Like the clumps of trees, etc., that might have gone missing through the open cast mining.
Sure.
When you're on the South Terrace.
I wonder if we can get a wider plan.
The views out from the South Terrace and what it used to look like, because it's all been strip mined, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the estate is doing, we haven't got a wider one, but the estate is doing and has done quite a lot of work recently, you'll probably know more about this than me, to take down trees to reopen views to the lake. So they're certainly sort of looking at some of the wider estate landscape restoration. There is a national footpath that runs down here, but you have to, I suppose, we'll need to remember that estate is private. They don't want people all over their land. So yeah, there is a national footpath that runs through there, which can connect up some of the monuments. So that's part way to that. There are, I know, active discussions going on with the garden centre, because yeah, we certainly met with the agent from the estate and walked around these possible car parks to see, just to sort of start the conversation off really. But that's going to be going on for several years, I would imagine, because the estate has their own plans about what they want to do with the farm. So that's another development that's happening. And so it's really important that those dialogues are kind of, continued and the parties do work together, because ideally you would be able to walk, as you say, right up into the garden centre from this way and experience the rest of the historic gardens and the bear pit, cockpit. Yeah.
I think when you
and the duck,
when you consider the Trust have had the Wentworth Woodhouse for 5 years, and we've done an incredible amount within that 5 years, and up until those 5 years ago, it was a private house. And the family, of course, when the mining happened, they just up sticks and moved to Ireland. They couldn't bear looking at it. So the relationships between the wider estates and the garden centre, we've always had good relations, but there was never a need to really extend beyond the boundary that we have. And I suppose we're lucky to have what we do have. I worked on an estate up in Scotland, and the grand house was chopped up into flats, and the 50 acres was chopped up into building plots. So we're lucky we're, not at that stage. So I think within 5 years, we've done a lot to get to this stage, and this informs the Fitzwilliam Amenity Trust, and they start to think, actually, the garden centre do the same. And I think the long-term plan is that Wentworth just becomes synonymous with a great place to come and visit. Doesn't matter who owns what, which boundary is where, it's Wentworth as a whole. And I think this gives us that conversation to say, although there's a boundary, it's in name alone, and really we look at opening up as best we can. Anybody else? Oh, David.
I was just going to mention that we have in the past, with the garden tours, when we used to do guided tours in the gardens, we have gone into the garden centre and taken our visitors around their their features, you might say. So
Yeah, we did that for a couple of months until I decided it was wrong and they should focus more on my garden and how very dare they. So that was quickly brought to a halt. It's very much like we used to do a tour, back in the day when the Newbolds were here, and it was the Fitzwilliam tour, and it was almost 2.5 hours long with no breaks, no lunch, no nothing. It was a marathon. And that was pretty much like the tour that Davis just mentioned, that you took in our garden, the garden centre garden. So there was a lot to take in. But like I say, those conversations are there. And I think it benefits everyone just to be at the table, even if there's disagreement along the way.
So it's kind of work in progress, really, isn't it? Very much.
Yeah, and it's like I say, the conversations are happening, so there's no closed doors. Anybody else?
Are you keeping the Mabel buildings then? What were the?
Well, the what you know as the swimming pool and the science block directly abutting the stable block, they become part of our new visitor experience. So those of you that know our World Heritage pothole car park will be able to step out into nice fresh tarmac. The ones on the hill will be demolished and that will turn back into historic parkland, which will again benefit us greatly because we'll stop having to fielding questions about what's those ugly buildings on the hill.
Yeah. So all of those will go.
Anybody else? No? Well, I'd just like to again thank Sally and John for giving me more work than I can ever hope to get through. Hopefully you're all seasoned visitors to the garden and you follow our story and our seasonality. The next big thing is the Camellia House project. So if you've not seen the Camellia House before it gets redeveloped, I would get into the garden before May because that's when that starts. And it'd be wonderful for you to see it as it is now, and then be able to sit and have a cup of tea inside it. Exciting news this week, I think we've discovered 2 more of the 19 camellias, mini steps. So I'm off to Chiswick on Tuesday to collect the 50 camellias that were taken 2 years ago as cuttings and are now fully fill-edged plants, and they come back to our site for me to look after. Hopefully, fingers crossed.
Yeah. No pressure.
So like you can see, there's a lot to see. For those of you that know the garden, it is wonderful, and it's almost my life's work for the last 20 years. And I can only applaud Sally and John for a light touch. I know when Sarah first mooted the fact that there was going to be master planners scrutinising my garden, it was a bit like cold chills. But when you get individuals who realise and understand and appreciate this landscape and work alongside someone like myself, I look at myself as the steward of this garden, not the owner, not the head gardener, just someone that's here for now and will pass the baton on to the next person. So the best I can do is hand it off in better stead. So I think that's it for tonight. Thank you all very much for turning out tonight, and thank you to Sally.
Yeah.
And we'll see a lot more of Sally and a lot more work, so it's exciting times. Stay tuned.
Thanks very much.